Flacyd. For this round, Skydance has taken the position that advertisements that target children should be illegal. Flacyd's taken the opposition. Since this is a semi-final round, both participants will have 50 minutes during the debate. As always, we're going to be based upon who concedes. If we don't get a vocal concession, we'll put it to the new voting poll, in which the listeners will be presented with 3 questions in which the listeners can vote on who they think performed better for each question, leading to a contribution of points to each debater. The debater that has the most overall points at the end of the voting poll will win the debate. Thank you both for debating. You can get started.
All right, how do we want to do this?
Well, I've got the positive claim, I suppose, so I could go first. I think that's kind of the pattern I typically like.
Sounds good.
All right, so I want to do something that Arco did with me, which I thought was very professional and respectful. Was thank you everybody for being here. Thank you, Flacyd, for being my opponent. I look forward to round 2 of us debating. It's gonna be really exciting. Yeah. So I'm taking the position that advertisements that target children should be illegal. And real quick, I think we kind of briefly agreed, and I just want to make sure that's cool that by children we're talking about age 12 and under.
Yep.
Okay, cool. And I also want to make sure that we're talking about targeting children. We obviously can't shield children from seeing any ads whatsoever, so it's just about ads that are specifically targeted towards kids. Uh, uh, that we're going to talk about. So, is that cool too?
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Okay, great. So basically, my argument is that kids are not consumers, and the harmful effects that it has on kids are not worth the advertising. So those are basically my 2 points. With the first one, that kids are not consumers, they aren't able to comprehend the objective of ads. They only have a partial understanding of the intent of selling and buying. They don't really have an understanding of money. They quickly learn a lot of bad habits, which, and this goes into my second point about the harmful effects. And we're definitely going to talk about childhood obesity and the laws that have already come up about bad ads that encourage kids to eat, harmful foods that are filled with sugar and fat and things like that. But yeah, so basically, we are using ads in this way. When we target kids, we're turning them into these mini consumers that just want to look to external things to validate themselves and to give themselves self-worth. And so it's not just obesity. We have a lot of depression issues, I think, going up, and a lot of issues with being social with kids. And so, yeah, I think we should definitely ban ads that target children.
Great,
Yeah,
thanks.
you're welcome.
Um, so to respond, I think obviously we need to protect children from unfiltered media exposure, including advertisements. And children are especially susceptible to the messages they see in the media and in advertisements. But when it comes to advertising, I think specifically what this prompt gets at is protecting children from 2 things: manipulation and dangerous products. Um, I argue that making child targeted ads illegal does not achieve the goals of actually protecting children from manipulation and dangerous products, but might actually make them more susceptible. And making child targeted ads illegal is a waste of enforcement measures that are desperately needed in other areas of serious commercial fraud, and that this prohibition is so vague as to be unenforceable. And I like that you brought up that kids are not consumers, because I agree. Kids are not consumers. I don't know any 10 and 11-year-olds that really have a whole lot of money to spend. Um, and so by we're not really protecting children by eliminating their ad exposure. If our concern is manipulation of these children's, that kids will buy something they otherwise wouldn't have, we need to ask ourselves how these kids plan to purchase this thing. Without an adult, it's incredibly unlikely that these kids could purchase what's being advertised to them. So the real person being manipulated by these ads is not the kids. Even if it's targeted at the kids, it's the adults that are being manipulated, because an ad can be targeted at both adults and their parents. And I think it necessarily has to be targeted in some respect to the parents, because the parents have the power to purchase and the power to say no. And banning ads targeted to kids isn't going to change the power of a parent to buy something or not to buy something.
So this seems like a great time to bring up a term that I had never heard before that I think is great, which is called pester power. And it's basically the idea that kids, when they see these ads, they pester their parents to buy the things that they desire, and that they don't really understand the consequences or the downsides of these things. They just see the ad and they're told, you must have this. You'll be cool if you'll have this. Your life will be more fun if you have this. And then they go and pester their parents to the point of exhaustion. And I think a lot of parents can probably relate to that frustration and giving in. I mean, parents are humans too. They only have so much willpower, and eventually they will cave in and just give the kid what they want when the kid doesn't really have the emotional or practical intelligence to be able to really tell what it is they really want from what they think they want.
So of course there's this pastor power thing of just like the constant begging for the thing. You can tell that the kid really, really wants what this thing is. And I don't know that it's always necessarily just a product of advertising. I mean, we have to talk about peer pressure and all of these other things. But I still think that we need to put the onus on adults in the situation to make good choices. And I mean, plenty of parents make bad choices for their kids, right? But I don't think that parenting is necessarily in the realm of a business decision. I think that has to be up to the parents about how they want to parent their kids and how much they want to expose them to consumerism, instead of placing that onus on business, which has a conflicting interest.
Right. So I think you said something a little earlier about how these advertisements do have a manipulative impact on kids. Do we agree there that there is an effect happening?
Oh, certainly.
So, a lot of laws have come up since then that regulate these ads to restrict the amount that kids are exposed to ads that target them towards unhealthy food. So this is where I want to bring up childhood obesity. Some statistics I saw were even worse than I really imagined. In the UK, up to about 1 in 3 kids by the age of 10 or 11 is considered obese. And so a lot of laws have started to come out to start to restrict this advertising because there is a manipulative effect going on and kids are affected by this. And I don't think that it's enough to put the onus on parents. I think that if we can reduce that amount of childhood obesity by reducing the advertising, and it looks like based on the laws that have come out that we can, then why not ban it completely? Why give these corporations the ability to advertise to them in the first place? Is there even any benefit to that?
So I think what we're talking about is a dangerous product, and a product is dangerous regardless of its advertisement. If we're allowing kids to eat food that is so unhealthy and in amounts that are so incredibly unhealthy, we need to be asking the question about why the product is dangerous and regulate the product and the purchasing of the product, not the advertisement of the product. This is what we do with things like paintball guns and softball gun or airsoft guns and cigarettes and tobacco and things like this. We're regulating the product itself to make the product less dangerous.
Right, which I think we should do, but adults have the ability to choose what they want to do for themselves. So even if you're not obese, you should still have the ability to buy a candy bar or soda if you want. And even kids are allowed to do that too. I mean, I don't think that kids should be prohibited from ever eating chocolate, but the idea is just to reduce that amount. And if we can reduce the ads and then see a reflection in the society that reduces the amount of obesity, then I see no reason not to do that.
So, I mean, I agree that advertising does have an effect on kids and what they want, and that's especially true. I saw a lot of examples using sugary cereal, and it's not just the advertising on TV of using cartoons, but it's also where they place it on the shelf. And this leads me to my lack of enforcement concern, where even if we're trying to ban ads that target children, and we're thinking about where these cereal boxes are being placed on the shelves, they're being placed as advertisement. They're being placed at the eye level of children to make sure that children see it. But how do you enforce, millions of grocery stores and how they choose to organize their shelves?
Right. Yeah, we can't eliminate 100% of the effect that this has. But when we talk about advertisements that are targeting kids, we're not talking about placement on shelves. We're talking about ads that have cartoon characters, songs that get stuck in their heads, bright colors, this appeal to children to manipulate minds that aren't able to understand that they're being manipulated. And then that results in this increase of childhood obesity, and not just obesity, but a lot of bad social practices such as valuing commodity purchasing, consumerism, turning people into just consumers that reflect their social well being and their sense of self in the things that they own or buy.
So yeah, I agree. There can be negative aspects, but that's not limited to just ads that target children. That's ads in general. That's ads across society. And I don't think we're doing children any favor by totally shielding them from this thing, only to have them exposed to it totally in the future. I think the best practice here is to allow these ads to continue, but allow parents to filter the ads and to explain to kids why these ads might not be totally true and what the value of these ads really are, instead of just shielding them entirely or trying to shield them entirely, and then them not having these skills when they get to an age where they're not shielded to be able to decipher between these things. And I also want to make the point of, we're talking about manipulation, but manipulation can have good effects. If we're trying to ban ads that target children, we're also talking about positive advertising. We're talking about TV ads that promote healthy habits like anti-smoking, and the Play 60 ads, which encourage kids to go outside and play for 60 minutes, and advertisements for educational toys that smaller companies wouldn't be able to compete with giants like Fisher Price and Mattel. And these toys might be very, very beneficial for the kids. But I think we're also talking about ads that talk to kids about what to do if they're being abused, or if a parent is being abused, how to deal with bullying and who to talk to.
So this does go into your question a little earlier about, are we going to go into public service announcements? I do see a difference between advertisement and consumerism and a public service announcement. I think that because there is an influence and because these kids can be manipulated, things like public service announcements are good. But those aren't trying to get you to buy anything. They're trying to change other kinds of habits, and using that manipulation in a good way to change habits isn't advertisement in a way to me, because I consider advertisement to be advertising a product that you want to buy. And if we're trying to say that public service announcements, which get kids more active, is the same thing, I wouldn't agree with that in terms of especially the constraints of the debate, though we can go into it if you want.
So what about the advertising for toys that might be incredibly beneficial? Like, one toy that I'm thinking of specifically is by a very small independent company that makes like versions of common board games, but uses women as like real historical women as role models, instead of having just like the constant influence of only male role models. How do we expect companies that are actually trying to help children and make a difference in children, and giving them these tools to learn, if we're not going to allow them to advertise?
I think they can advertise. They just have to advertise to the parents who are actually the consumer. You can't advertise to the kid who isn't actually buying it. Only the parent can make the choice whether or not this toy is going to be beneficial for the child. And I think this is where I agree with you on the onus being on the parents, because we can't expect these advertising companies to know what actually is beneficial. The parents are going to know best whether or not that child should have that toy, because not every kid is going to be suited for every toy. And so they can still advertise. They just have to advertise to the parents.
So how is that different from toys that may not be beneficial, or these consumerist ideas that we're talking about, where couldn't they just advertise to the parents and we have the same effect anyway?
Well, the difference is that when you advertise and target a child, you're manipulating their mind in a long-term way. There are some research studies I pulled up that when you start to develop certain food habits at a young age, those food habits carry on into adulthood. So if you develop healthy food habits, those will carry into adulthood. And if you develop bad food habits and addictions to things like sugar and high fat content, that will carry into adulthood as well. And those kids don't ever have a chance to start to build other better habits, healthier habits, when they're targeted at such a young age and so easily manipulated into these thought processes.
I mean, but they do have a chance, right? They're not the ones that are buying their weekly meals. They're not the ones that are getting the meals that are served to them at school. The parents have the sole control about what their children eat. And so while a kid might want to eat Halloween candy every day, it's up to the parents to say no. And so while I think that there might be an impact on learned behaviors by advertisements, it's not the sole cause of developing these routines and behaviors. The sole cause of developing these routines and behaviors is what their parents are allowing them to do.
And this goes back into the pester power thing because I think it's just kind of unfair to say that parents have to be the sole gatekeepers and that we expose these kids to hours a day of advertisements that turn them into these just screaming children in the grocery store things. And we can't expect every parent to be able to have the willpower to handle that every single day. And if we can reduce that effect of pester power, then we can give parents a better chance to develop those healthy habits instead of just saying you should be a better parent because, a lot of them are just going to be too tired and they're not going to have the ability to say no every single time. And so it's just a matter of reducing that percentage. Even if, every once in a while the kid is screaming in the grocery store for candy, if we can just reduce the amount of times that that happens by reducing the amount of ads that they're exposed to that are targeted towards them, then we can give those parents a better chance to develop those healthy habits.
So my response to that comes in two parts. First, we absolutely have to hold the parents accountable because this is what we do in every other aspect of raising a kid. It's not up to, Mattel to raise your child. It's not up to Kellogg to raise your child. It's up to you to raise your child. And kids are going to be irrational and unreasonable. That's just the nature of being a child. It's up to parents to explain to them why they can't have the thing. They need to learn that they can't have everything that they want. And the second point that I want to make to that is it comes back to enforcement of how do we truly tell whether or not it's being advertised to kids or the parents, because I think we both know that advertising is getting more and more sophisticated. We're not just talking about the days of seeing something in a magazine anymore and you can just flip the page, right? Kids are getting advertising in schools, they're getting advertising on TV, on the internet, everywhere they go. And so I don't know how we're supposed to enforce whether or not a company is advertising to children or the children's parent.
Yeah, so and this is where the targeted thing really comes into play and why I wanted to bring that up to begin with. Obviously, these kids are going to be exposed to ads, but when they're targeted towards kids, when they're on children's channels or in between children's TV shows, or when they have these cartoon characters and these songs, all those things are targeted not to adults, but they're meant to manipulate children's minds, and that's the thing that should be made or that should be banned, especially from children's channels, children's Facebook pages, um, or YouTube channels. It's not something that you can 100% insulate a child from. It's just a matter of giving them a better chance, not allowing them to see hours and hours of manipulative ads every single day that isn't just creating pester power, but it's changing their minds. It's changing their minds about the things that they value and the things that they think they should have, and equating happiness and a sense of well being with material goods and consumerism.
So I mean, equating that sense of self with consumerism it very well may happen regardless of the ads that they're exposed to, because we live in a capitalist culture, we live in a commodified culture, and this is the way that things are currently working. There's no way to escape that. But when we talk about ads, especially on children's TV channels or YouTube channels, I don't know how we expect content creators to continue making content for kids if they aren't getting any sort of payment. And when we're talking about TV, especially, more and more children's TV is leaning towards being educational. And so that's something that we want for all children, regardless of income, and moving to a system where only kids with parents who can afford to pay for premium channels that don't have advertisement so that they can engage in the same kind of media that is very likely beneficial media seems it seems unfair.
I mean, I 100% agree with you. I don't think that they should have to pay for premium content to escape ads, and that's why I think we should ban these ads from targeting children.
But how can we expect children's TV channels to continue to operate if there's no monetary incentive?
I think there will still be a monetary incentive. I mean, we're moving towards a kind of pay-per-view buffet style TV situation anyway, and there will still be things like public service announcements, and there will still be payment, and if there will still be public TV as well. It's just a matter of getting rid of these ads that are targeted towards kids. Not all ads in general. We can have ads that are targeted towards adults on those channels too. It's just trying to reduce this effect that's clearly happening. And we know that it's happening because there are a lot of research studies that back laws that have been banning a lot of these ads already, especially things like cartoon characters and cigarettes, like the Joe Camel thing. And so if we can take away that cartoon character, ban that kind of advertising, and then see a reduction in smoking in younger children, then I see no reason not to do the same thing with all of these ads that are promoting these unhealthy behaviors.
But it wasn't just taking Joe Camel off of the Camel cigarettes that we saw a reduction. There was plenty of anti-smoking initiatives happening at the time, like raising the smoking level to 18 and strictly enforcing the smoking level or the smoking age. And so I don't think we can accurately measure whether or not advertisement has this direct correlative or causative result. And when I was looking at the American Psychology, or it was the American Pediatrics Association's recommendations for limiting the effect that advertising has on children, they had about 15 different recommendations, and not one said to eliminate the advertising, but more to have parents be more involved, to educate children on how advertising works and how the effects of them, or the effects the advertisement has on them, and for educators to understand the kind of effects that advertising has on them.
I'm going to agree with you that correlation is not causation, but if we do see a correlation, then I don't see any reason not to ban these ads. If the only reason coming up is that these companies would lose money, I don't think that's a strong enough reason. I mean, this is the difference between money and a healthy society. This is the difference between having people who have better, healthier lives versus companies having money.
So I'm not making the argument that the only thing preventing us is money. Although I do think that money talks as an argument, especially when we're talking about businesses and what businesses can say and do. And I think that eliminating these ads that target children is going to be harmful for the children in the long run. We should, again, require parents to make decisions about what programs they want their children to watch and what ads they're consuming. And when children see ads, we need to allow parents to say no when their children want unhealthy, sugary cereal. And I think the best way to protect children is not to shelter them and then expose them to everything all at once. It's to filter and explain what we want to protect them from so they understand why eating Fruit Loops every day is bad for them and why they can't have the toy that they see. Because this is instilling good lessons. This is instilling good habits for parents to explain to them why it's happening instead of just being silent about it.
I mean, I agree with you. Parents should be better parents, but we can't expect them to be battling billion-dollar industries that have huge research foundations behind making advertisements more manipulative and making that pester power stronger, because that's the motivation is money. And you said that you think that it's worse for children to ban ads. Can you say why?
I think that having an all-out ban on advertisements that target children is going to lead to them being so sheltered to when they're now 13 and exposed to all of these ads, they're not going to have the coping mechanisms to understand why these ads are being targeted at them and what these ads are actually doing.
They're still going to see ads between those ages. I mean, as you pointed out earlier, we can't insulate them completely from advertisements in general. It's just about reducing ads targeted towards them. So kids between 0 and 12 are still going to see more ads than I personally am even comfortable with. It's just if we reduce the ads that are targeted towards children, we're going to reduce the effect of those ads on children, and we're going to improve their mental capacity to be able to resist them because they're going to be listening to their parents more than these ads because they're just exposed to less of them over time.
I mean, I don't know any kids that really care about blood pressure medication, and so if this is the kind of advertising that they're gonna be seeing, they're not gonna engage with it, and they're not gonna ask their parents for the thing. They're not gonna ask their parents about the advertisement because it's gonna be a non-issue. It's gonna be totally irrelevant to them, and so these coping skills aren't gonna come up even though these ads are fleeting, and not by them. There's no discussion that's brought up.
They're still going to see ads. They're not going to ignore that. It's just that the ads aren't going to be targeted towards the kids. They're going to be targeted towards the parents. And so you're going to see ads for toys that are trying to appeal to the parents saying, isn't this going to be great for your kid because it does this, this, and this? And then we get a more honest ad where it's saying, this is why it's good for your kid because they suddenly have to handle an adult brain instead of a manipulative child brain.
I mean, but can't we allow parents to make the decision about what toys that their kid wants? I mean, it's so disappointing to buy a kid a toy and then they get it and it's just absolutely not what they want. And we need to instill decision-making skills into kids to be able to say, well, you can't have both of these things. You need to choose one. And so these are the kind of skills that we're building that aren't going to go away. The pressures from advertisement is not going to go away.
I mean, if anything, children who don't have the ability to make these kinds of decisions are going to develop worse habits if they're allowed to see these kind of ads because they're going to start to think, I need to have this fast food in order to be happy. And they're not going to have the ability when they get older to resist that kind of advertisement because they've already been exposed to it and become susceptible to it from such a young age that it literally begins to change their brains over time. And the studies have shown obese children become obese adults. It's not something that they suddenly become adults and change their minds about.
But skinny children also become obese adults. The effects of advertising don't stop at age 12. The whole point of advertising is to be manipulative. And so while it's a different kind of manipulation for children, it's still manipulation when they move into the adult sphere, and adults are not insulated from this.
That's true. I think that advertising in general is very manipulative and coerces people into bad habits, and that's why we should protect children from it because they don't have the kind of defenses that adults do, and we can't rely on parents to be the gatekeepers 100% of the time because it's just not going to happen. It's a nice idea that parents should be that way, but they just aren't that way. So if we can get rid of these ads targeted towards them, then we can just see a reduction in childhood obesity in general. And I don't see a problem with that, especially if the only thing we have to give up is money to these corporations.
So it's not just that the ads are manipulative. Like I agree with you that there are some ads that cross the line, but that is true of all advertisement, regardless of who it's being targeted against. And we have these laws in place, like you mentioned, but it's about of it's about the message that the ads are sending that we're trying to mitigate there. And when an ad is so manipulative and so misleading and so false as to be harmful, these companies pay 3 times as much damage as they caused in fines. And so that's a huge incentive to be honest in their advertising. And so while there is gray area between what exactly is true honesty and what exactly is, puffing up the product a little bit, I think that's well within a company's rights to try and do business. This is what they're here to do. They're here to make things and sell things, and it's up to parents to make choices about how their kids are raised. And so while we can't expect parents to be perfect parents, that's not the argument that I'm making. I'm expecting parents to be reasonable parents and not trust their kids to be raised by companies.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's just not going to happen all of the time. And so we have to come up with other ways to make a healthy society and to make a healthy generation that's growing up. And I agree with you, it is about the message. The only reason that anybody would ever target an ad to a child isn't to try to sell more product, it's to try to increase that pester power, to try to get them to wear the parent down over time so that the parent ends up buying the thing that the child wants that is bad for the child. And it's just not going to be the case that parents just should be better parents. It's not the answer. We just should have a better society in general. And I don't see any benefit at all to advertising to children except to increase that pester power. There's literally no other reason to do it.
I mean, reasons to do it are to keep children's shows on the air that may be beneficial. The reason to do it is to allow kids these skills to speak these languages, to have the ability to decipher between what they want instead of it being this deluge of choices that they're not informed enough to make once they reach age 13. And I want to talk more about how are we actually going to be able to enforce whether or not an ad is targeted at a child or targeted at the adult, because I can very well see a case where somebody says, you know what, we're taking this ad off the air because it's targeting a child. Where's the line? Who makes the decision on what content is towards a child when the advertising company in its sophistication is very well able to prove, like, nope, we're I mean, we're using bright colors, sure, but bright colors also appeal to 16-year-olds. That's
You
who
know,
we're trying to market to.
you're mentioning this deluge, this flood that happens at the age of 13 and how bad it is, but you're not really talking about how this deluge would be even worse for a 6-year-old, and that by the time they reach 13, they're already going to be so manipulated, having spent 13 years of their life exposed to the same deluge that you're saying is a problem suddenly at 13. Well, at 13, your brain is developed enough to be able to understand the purpose behind ads, to be able to understand the role of money in society, especially in your family. And these kids can make better choices and be able to discern ads better. Whereas at 6 years old or 3 years old, they have absolutely no ability to do that whatsoever. So I think you're right about the deluge. It's even more of a problem earlier, and it shouldn't happen before the age of 13.
I mean, sure, there is a lot of advertising that happens before 13, but it doesn't happen all at once. They're not having to make these critical thinking decisions right when it happens, when we're like, all right, you're 13, you can see all the advertising you want. Because before then, we're leading up to it and we're giving plenty of chances for not just parents, but for teachers and educators to step in and say, you know what, you really don't need this thing.
We can't expect 6-year-olds to understand that. We can expect 13-year-olds to understand that. And that's when we can start teaching them the difference. Okay, now you're going to be exposed to ads that are targeted towards you. And here's how you discern what's good and what's bad. But we can't sit down and have that conversation with a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, 10-year-old. They're just not going to be able to understand it. And there are studies behind this, which is why a lot of the studies I looked up put that at 12 and below. And the countries that have made targeting towards children illegal all target that age of 12 and below for those laws, including the UK, Greece, Denmark, Belgium, Norway, and Quebec in China, or China and Canada. And so that's when the brain becomes developed enough to handle it. But before that, they don't have the ability, and we can't expect the deluge, as you said, to not have a detrimental effect between those ages of 0 and 12.
I mean, I have to disagree. I think you can absolutely talk to 6-year-olds about issues that we might think are way too complex for them if you can speak their language and communicate with them in a way that they understand. And if advertisers can do it, certainly the people who are raising them and know them best can do it.
But they can't do it all the time, and especially when they're battling hours and hours every single day of exposure to these ads, and when it really starts to change their habits and their values and the way that they value things around them, the parents really don't have a chance. And again, even if parents are able to gatekeep some of the time, we can't expect it all of the time. So if the goal isn't to 100% fix the problem. They're still going to be exposed to ads. They're still going to be exposed to bad food, to bad habits, especially to bad parenting. But if they don't get that deluge of advertisement between the ages of 0 and 12, they're going to have a better ability to discern between what they should have and what they shouldn't have, better eating habits, better social skills, better mental ability to resist those kinds of ads.
So I can understand the thinking here, but I think that we can't just only talk about this issue in terms of how do we totally prevent it, and then if parents want to talk to them about this thing, they can opt in. When that's the system we already have, plenty of parents can just say, no, we're not going to do TV, or no, you're not going to watch YouTube or something like that, and just make it totally unavailable. That's already a choice that parents have, but it's not up to businesses and the government to say what exactly children are allowed to be taught, what exactly they're allowed to be seen, and only in this very narrow subset. It's up to parents. If parents want kids to be able to watch TV, and certainly there's a line. You're not gonna be advertising um, purely adult content on Cartoon Network or something like that, and that's not something we would want.
No, not at
Um,
all. It shouldn't be purely adult content. You can still advertise toys. You just advertise them to the parent. Here are the reasons your child would like this toy. Here are the reasons you should buy this toy for your child. That's the real audience that they're trying to reach, and they're manipulating children to use pester power to get to the real consumers, which are the parents.
Right, but I don't see why we put the onus on the government and the businesses to say what exactly parents are allowed to expose their children to. I mean, even if it's as it stands right now, you know, parents can put on Law and Order SVU for their kids. I think that's a little bit ridiculous, but people have some pretty weird parenting philosophies.
I mean, why allow that advertising and that manipulation to happen at all, though? Why not just advertise directly to the parents? Why even have that manipulation of children except to have that pester power, which wears them down over time and which creates these consumers in children that have brand loyalty from a young age that they didn't choose for themselves, and the parents didn't choose for them either, because a lot of parents can't choose the ads that they're exposed to out in public. And a lot of ads out in public are still targeted towards kids. It's not just a matter of turning off the TV, because they're still going to see ads everywhere. I mean, we're exposed to it all over the place. And so it's just about the targeting. Where is that bullseye going to be pointed at? Is it going to be towards the parents that are able to make a coherent decision about what's best for the kid? Or is it going to be towards these young minds that aren't able to tell even what the ad's intent is, and that ads are manipulative? These kids don't know those kinds of things. They don't understand the role of money, and there's no reason to target them at all.
So, I mean, the ads aren't going away. I brought this up. The manipulation isn't going away. You can't keep kids from being exposed to this. It's not going to work. But what is going to work is parents stepping in and saying, we're not watching TV. It's not going to work. And so it doesn't seem like there is already this choice in the current setting that we have for kids to not be exposed to advertisements, or at least have limited exposure to advertisements. And so if we're going to stop ads that are supposedly targeted at children, and maybe advertising companies can worm their way out of it, this, that, and the other thing, what are we really preventing if we don't have a clear way to say that, what, kids are not going to be manipulated by these ads, and here's what we're going to do to stop it? What are we really stopping? I think like you said, kids are going to be exposed to advertisements, so we need to come up with other ways to make sure that kids aren't being manipulated.
Yeah, and I think one of those ways is to just reduce the targeted ads towards them. I agree with you. They're still going to be exposed to ads. They're going to be exposed to hours of ads every single day. But if they aren't targeted towards kids, then we are having an effect on them and allowing the parent to play a greater role in deciding what they value, what they consider healthy behavior, and how they become better adults in society.
So, how do we measure if an ad is truly marketed towards or targeted at children, right? Because it's totally possible that, you know what, the advertising company is going to say, you know, we're just advertising it for age 15 kids. So I think we're moving into a territory where it has to be clearly marketed towards children, but then we're still getting advertising that's targeted at children.
Now, I mean, the how is a different question about whether or not we should. And if we do decide that we should, we can figure out a plan of action how. A lot of countries have already done it. It's going to involve a lot of demographics. It's going to be very similar to the way that companies already target ads, knowing whether or not you are male or female or of a certain age or of just another certain demographic. And so that's going to play a big part of it, as well as where they see these things. But if you have an ad that's targeted towards a kid, it usually has a kid the same age as them. It usually has a lot of very cartoonish aspects to it, bright colors. And there's a lot of signifiers that adults are not interested in these sorts of things. They don't appeal to adults. And so it's one of those things where we can't directly say where it's happening. It would be a case by case basis on a lot of different cases, but the how is separate from whether or not we should. And if we decide that we should, it's definitely possible to do it, as many countries have already done.
Okay, so for the sake of argument, if this kind of law went into effect, um, I, I I think it could go one of two ways, right? We would either outlaw these commercials that are very clearly targeted towards children 12 and under, or it would be this situation where you know it's like, could it be appealing to children, could it be targeted towards children? And in either situation we have really bad outcomes. In the first situation we still have the same amount, nearly the same amount of advertisement heading towards children, because you know what, unless it's very clearly targeted towards children, there's plenty of room for an advertisement to still be targeted towards children, but it's targeting light. And in the second scenario, I mean, any ad could be potentially appealing to a child. So are we just going to be done with advertising totally?
Well, I mean, I am okay with targeting light, even if it's still somewhat targeted, because if we're cutting off the age at 13, you're going to see ads targeted towards teenagers, which are able to have jobs, have their own income, and buy things. And so they do become consumers, but they also have the brain power to do that, to understand the significance of money. Whereas kids in elementary school simply don't have that, and there's no reason to target them. So even if we have a gray area where, okay, this is kind of light targeting, that's better than what we have now. And we're still getting rid of the heavy targeting, which is causing an increase in childhood obesity as well as other unhealthy behaviors that we don't want people in society to have.
So in that situation, why don't we impose laws like we already have that restrict the content of the targeted ads, instead of, you know, saying these incredibly manipulative things and going for like the super bright lights and the flashing colors and these things that really worm into children's brain? Why don't we impose laws that say, you know what, you can target to kids because you're a company and we want to allow companies to compete with each other and compete for the under 12 market or the above 12 market, but instead say you can't put this thing in the ad.
Because they aren't consumers. The parents are the consumers. These companies can still target ads. They just have to target them towards the people actually buying them, who are able to determine whether or not they want this product. Children don't have that freedom to choose, do I really want this or not?
Right, that's a skill that they have to learn, and that skill can be learned very easily. And I think it's pretty well known in that raising kids, when you start teaching these lessons early, it becomes more instilled in them, and they're better able to practice these skills. And so, if we're going to say we're okay with targeting light, I mean that's still allowing for targeting, and all of these detrimental effects that we're talking about are still allowed in, unless we prohibit certain specific content, like the content in the ads that are targeted at the kids under age 12.
I would say that targeting light is exactly what you're talking about. You're trying to say that we have to expose them to certain types of advertising in order to prepare them to be able to handle these kinds of ads. That's what light targeting would do. What, they don't have the ability to make that kind of decision if they have heavy targeting from the age of 0 or 1 or however you want to phrase it, years old on. But if you have that gray area light targeting, and that's the strongest thing that children 0 to 12 are exposed to, they're going to much better be able to handle targeting that is directed at them when they reach a teenage age than if they've been exposed to it their entire lives and been manipulated to the point that their brain has developed around branding and consumerism. So I agree with you. I think light at best, because we can't 100% eliminate it, would help children be able to discern ads better than heavy targeting from the beginning of their lives.
So practically speaking, if we're talking about a case by case basis, like you mentioned, it takes years for these things to move through litigation, right? Like you know that, I know that, and so in the meantime, I mean, how many cases can you possibly have on this one thing going at one time? So in the meantime, we have all of this other advertising that's doing the same thing that we're trying to prevent. I think it's much more effective to focus on the content of the ads rather than only the audience of the ads, because the audience of the ad is so squishy and so subjective that even if you get all the way through the years of litigation, you still might not get the verdict that you want. When we focus on the content, it's clear, it's decisive, and it's easily enforceable.
I don't see the years of litigation being a problem. I think that's just par for the course, and I think that's not a reason not to do it. It's kind of a stretch, and I also think that having that kind of litigation in general will still have a better effect. I mean, this is about steering a ship in the right direction. It isn't a black or white issue. It isn't if we can't get rid of it 100%, we shouldn't do it at all.
So I totally agree. There are plenty of ads that are less than perfectly, or there are plenty of laws that are less than perfectly effective, and moving towards an end goal is admirable, and that's what we should be doing. But I mean, the reality of the situation is that attorneys general only have a certain amount of resources to be able to enforce advertising and consumer laws, and so I think we need to use those resources effectively and go towards something that is easy and doesn't take years for this litigation to move through, that may end in a settlement, that may not be usable in the future, or anything like that. When we can say like, no, you just can't use this very specific kind of content that uses fewer resources, and those resources are used more effectively.
Yeah, I don't mind using the resources for this. I also would say that it is easier. The easy path is to ban targeted ads towards children rather than relying on the parents to do this job, since clearly that isn't what's happening, because we are seeing this rise in childhood obesity and in a lot of other negative social behaviors related to exposure to these ads. And if we can reduce that, we simply have a better society. And it's easier to do that through a kind of legislation like this, even if it would take years, rather than to simply say parents should be better parents.
I mean, just to clarify, that last point that I was making isn't just that parents should be better parents. It's that if we are going to enforce laws about what ads children are supposed to be seeing, we need to use our resources. We, as in like attorneys general and prosecutors, need to use their resources in the most effective method, because we don't have unlimited resources to be able to tackle this problem. It would be wonderful if we did, but practically speaking, there's only so much that can be done.
I mean, in terms of resources, if we create a society that has people who have healthier habits, healthier eating, eat less in general, exercise more, we're going to have a better society that uses resources more efficiently rather than people who have extremely high rates of obesity. I mean, 1 in 3 children at the ages of 10 and 11 in the UK was the worst statistic I found. And that's going to be more of a detrimental effect over the lifetime of each child on resources than the amount of money it would take to change legislation laws on ads.
All right, so I see Stone just reminded us at the 10-minute mark, and we might be at the 5-minute mark now. Do we want to do closing statements?
Yeah, yeah, sure. Should you want to go first or me?
I can go first. So, the main point that I'm trying to make is I agree that children need to be protected from predatory media, from harassing media, from all of these negative consequences that we're talking about, but banning the target audience, or banning the practice of targeting an audience is an ineffective use of resources, and it also ineffectively addresses these harms that we're trying to prevent. The kids are still going to be exposed to advertising. They're still going to have these cultural lessons instilled into them about consumerism and these things. It's just, where is it coming from? But it's not just the amount. Like, you can only become so consumerist, once it's there, it's kind of there, and so they're going to learn it from other places. We're not adequately protecting them from these harms that we're supposedly trying to prevent, but instead we're keeping them from learning these coping skills and learning these methods for dealing with the way that advertisements work. And so I think the best course is to continue as is, allow parents to parent and make choices about what kind of media they want their kids to consume, and allow kids to learn lessons like you can't have everything that you want, and to learn lessons like, even though sugary cereal tastes good, you can't have it every day.
All right. I actually love the idea of coping mechanisms. I'm going to latch on to that because I think that's one of the best points, and I think that supports my point a lot. If we have kids exposed to highly targeted ads supported by $1 billion per year industry, they're not going to have the coping skills to be able to resist that advertising by the time they get older because they've been exposed to it from such a young age and become so conditioned into it uh, before they even have a choice about it. So if we ban targeting ads, we're going to be giving them a better chance to have exposure to ads that aren't targeted towards them so that they can understand advertising more, get that kind of exposure, and be able to navigate the consumerist world that we live in at a better time, as well as only have ads targeted towards consumers. Children are not consumers. They don't have money. They don't understand money. They don't understand the intent of ads. They don't understand that ads can even be manipulative because they're just too young from the ages of 12 and under. So when we ban that kind of specifically targeted advertisement, uh, we force these corporations to advertise to the actual consumers, which is the parents who are able to make those decisions themselves about whether or not these products are good for their kids. We're actually giving parents more power if we do that, rather than trying to go around the parents and manipulate their children while they're not around, or not hyper focus on every single ad that the child sees, which they can't do. And so, if we can create a better society, a healthier society, by banning something that doesn't have any benefit whatsoever and isn't even targeted towards consumers to begin with, then we're going to see an overall net benefit. We're going to see healthier people. We're going to have less obesity. We're going to see a lower impact on health industries, which I didn't even go into. And there's no reason not to do it.